അവിടുന്ന് വൈകുന്നേരം മടങ്ങി എന്നെ അവിടെ 5 കിലോമീറ്റർ
Hey everyone, it's Sam, and welcome back to the 911 Nonsense podcast. To stay in the loop, learn about upcoming guests, and join in the conversations with the Noon community, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And hey, if you like what you hear in this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us. On this episode of Noon, Nico, an assistant professor of emergency medicine and critical care, shares his journey from Louisiana to New Mexico and reflects on more than a decade in medicine. He opens up about overcoming imposter syndrome, lessons from simulation training, and the challenges of navigating ethical dilemmas in both veterinary and human care. Let's get started. All right, Nico, thank you so much for joining us on the Noon podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing so good. I'm so excited to have you on here. I love seeing your little face.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad that you were able to join. Being a doctor, I know how busy you can be. Go ahead and give me a quick intro.
All right. Well, hello to everybody out there. My name is Nico Parkham Chavez. I also go by Nick Parkham Chavez, and so you may hear both of those names. I am a assistant professor of emergency medicine and critical care medicine. I've been doing this being emergency medicine and critical care now for almost 10 years.
A long time, Nico.
A long time.
I remember when you first started as a little baby, you were so cute, and you've grown up and you're such a power when you walk into the ER. It's like everybody kind of surrounds themselves around you. It's really cool to see that.
I really appreciate you saying that. I think I still feel as, yesterday was my first day. And so, whenever I look back at kind of like the last 10 years, sometimes I have that feeling of, oh wow, I really have come far. And then there are certain days where, I still feel like it's day one all over again.
I think we all have that, right? That's kind of imposter syndrome.
For sure. I think imposter syndrome is very real and something that most of us in medicine or in it, I assume it doesn't matter whatever field. But I think we all struggle with that.
I agree. How do you feel like you work yourself to get past that?
I think one of the ways is kind of that self-examination that I mentioned, where it is good to review where you've been and how far you've come in your career, or in if you're a student, reviewing kind of your classes and just looking back at things that you didn't know in the past, or things that you weren't good at in the past, and then now how good you've become, or how smart you've become. And that helps to fight some of that. I think though, whenever you have stressful situations, everybody has the tendency to still snap back into imposter syndrome, but hopefully with kind of some re-examination, you can combat it a little bit.
For sure. And where did you come from, Nico? How'd you start and where'd you come from?
I grew up in Louisiana, born in kind of the central South Louisiana, and I did MD PhD in University of Texas, Houston, which is now called McGovern Medical School. But I spent almost a decade there in Houston, and then fell in love with the emergency medicine program in New Mexico, and decided to come a little bit west. Given the humidity and the climate in
Oh,
the
for
in the
sure.
South. I love the West Coast. And I think, I don't know, maybe I was born in the wrong environment, because I'm definitely more of a mountain boy than a swamp boy.
Swamp. You don't even have the accent. Louisiana is one of the states that I really, really want to go and visit. There's just such a rich culture there that I really would like to go and see.
I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful culture. And it is a beautiful place. And people tell me often that I don't really have an accent. And so, I think whenever you really get me worked up down in the ED, my accent comes out a little bit.
Have you always known that you wanted to be a doctor? Or is that something that you were just like, you know what, this seems like a good fit?
I think, whenever I was a small child, I had a family friend who got sick with a pretty bad brain tumor and unfortunately passed on. But he was kind of one of my early inspirations of wanting to be a physician and wanting to help people. And I think I kind of vacillated between wanting to be a physician and wanting to be maybe like a veterinarian or something else because I also grew up around animals and grew up in a pretty like rural farming type of neighborhood. And so I kind of oscillated back and forth between those possibilities. And then of course, as like all, college students do, you go through like those, the early life crises where it's like, is this really what I want to do, or is this just some dream that I had whenever I was a child and maybe I fell into the wrong thing and so kind of bounced around for other things, but found my way to medicine. And I think like now looking back on it, I think it's probably something that I always wanted to do.
Do you ever wish you had gone down the animal route and not the human route?
I don't know. I think both routes are difficult in their own ways, right? I think, I've had many animals and I think seeing them at the end of their life, I think that's the hard part for me, where a lot of them become like my children or become like members of the family. And so I don't know. I think having to relive that part is equally as hard as kind of being on the physician side and having to take care of families who have to see their loved ones pass on. So I'm not sure what the right route would have been for me. I do think sometimes that veterinary medicine is kind of fun and exciting and interesting because you have to take a patient that can't talk and can't really express their feelings, and you have to kind of work them up and figure out what's going on. So imagine veterinary medicine is kind of like a puzzle every day.
Yeah, that makes sense. People can be puzzles too, but most of the time they're able to talk, right? So you can kind of get an idea.
Exactly.
That's really cool. There's such a stigma, right? There's such a big stigma right now with vets being that um there's a huge increase in suicides in the last few like years because of the amount of animals that they have to put down.
Yeah.
It's kind of good and bad, right? Because there are animals who shouldn't suffer. That being said, there are a lot of animals that are getting put down because the families just can't afford the medical like process or part of it. Could you imagine if that was how we treated humans?
I
That would
mean,
be nuts, right? Like,
yeah, that's it is crazy to kind of like think about that prospect. And it is sad to hear. I didn't realize that statistic either, that veterinarians or people who practice veterinary medicine are at risk of increased rates of suicide. And it's tragic to hear.
um, I think that we're seeing an increase of people being allowed to like commit suicide, right? In a sense where if and I don't know which states it is. I know in Canada it's more widely used. I can't remember what it's called. Assisted suicide, I think, is where they give
Mhm.
them the medications if they have a terminal diagnosis, right, or prognosis. And I think that that is a good idea, right, because we have so many people that are suffering for so long that that's just not an option for them. And I think giving them that option is kind of a unique and interesting new insight and a new movement for medicine. I think that's something that'll be good in the long run as long as we're utilizing it properly.
Yeah, I do agree. Actually, I was raised Catholic and especially Jesuit Catholics have a huge emphasis on kind of a lot of social justice ethics, and kind of, focus on what is good for the individual and what's good for the whole. Um, and so I feel, the a person's bodily autonomy and a person's right to their life is something that we need to focus on as a society, and maybe something that has kind of undergone some attacks in recent years. And so, I do think I agree with you. It needs to be done in a very right way, and it needs to be done in a very appropriate way, and one that respects the person and kind of their process, their life. Um, but I think it's something that I wish more states had a focus on. New Mexico does indeed have a similar subset of laws in place. And I think, just in the past few years, it's helped a lot of people take control of their disease process and take control of their life.
Is that something, because you get to work in the ICU and in the ER setting. Is that something that ever like conflicts with your personal self when you have these really sick patients that maybe families kind of really holding on to and having a hard time letting go, where like it's really hard to keep these people going because they're only going because we have a tube down their throat and we're breathing for them, and then we have medications that's helping maintain their blood pressure. Like literally, if we stopped one thing, everything would stop for this person. Is that ever a conflict for you and for your religion?
I think, yes, that is a conflict. Frequently, I err on the side of the kind of medical non-beneficial aspect of this and kind of the person's own autonomy. Where, it's hard sometimes whenever we have patients that express to us that I wouldn't want this intervention done. I would not want to be dependent on machines. And then we have families who have kind of their discordant beliefs. I think that's hard from kind of a personal moral standpoint, because I really would love to respect the will of the patients, and sometimes we can kind of have some discussions with family and help them see their loved one's side of the picture and help them see that, hey, your loved one is really sick, and we are just trying to help them enter a different phase of their life. And we of course are supporting their body right now, but we can only do so up until a certain point. And it is in their wishes, it is in their desires that they may not want these particular interventions. And so sometimes we are successful in kind of helping a family adjust to that reality. Sometimes, though, I think that the tougher cases are whenever it is impossible, or whenever there's an excessive discordance between what families verbalize and what our patients have verbalized. And so I think that's where it gets really hard. I think that wears a ton on new trainees, and even seasoned physicians and seasoned nurses, seasoned paramedics that work with us in the ICU. I think that's where it gets really tough.
Yeah, I imagine. And were you ever trained on how to broach these conversations? Like, did you have to take any classes, or was that something that you've just learned in training, like as you're going on?
That's a great question. I wish we had kind of like a formal training program within our relative subspecialties. We get small seminars and we get small classes on these topics, but never like a regimented course. I went to a Catholic college, and we did actually place an emphasis on things like medical ethics, on like legal aspects in medicine and healthcare. And so that's kind of where I learned some of these abilities and how to talk to families and how to talk to patients about their end of life wishes and about their care. But I don't know if everybody gets that kind of training. There are different pathways that people can take. They can do a separate fellowship in what's called palliative care medicine, where they get a lot of experience in talking to families about end of life care and kind of other programs that we have to support families at with their wishes. But I think that's something special that you'd have to do. And so, not many physicians that I know end up going that route.
Yeah, that's a tough route. I was just talking with my wife about this, about how hospice nurses and hospice physicians, like that is a very specific type of person that can do that, right? Because that's a really hard place. I don't know if you've ever heard of Alexandra Jobber. She's a paramedic who actually does classes for talking with families about their family members who are getting ready to pass, and she does some really good stuff. I'll send you her info after this, but I'm wondering if we can't get, I mean, in a huge level one trauma center, and even in level twos and level threes, I feel like this should be a standard practice, right? Like we should be getting these classes on how to broach these conversations because we're seeing some of the worst, like patients, like some of these people that we absolutely cannot save. And being trained to be able to have these conversations, I think is very important.
Totally. I wholeheartedly agree. And even before that, I think education on these matters probably starts from an earlier age too. And I see that a lot where a lot of families, and it kind of is dependent on kind of your cultural background as well. But a lot of families just have difficulties in broaching the topic of either end of life or difficult conversations just in general. And so I encourage, whenever I work with a resident or an intern, it doesn't matter what age they're at. I encourage them to speak with their families about what they would want for themselves and kind of open up that conversation with their own loved ones to kind of have the difficult conversation in a more peaceful manner rather than, whenever shit really hits the fan and, something bad happened to somebody and they're in a hospital room with a physician and they're having to have a difficult conversation and everybody's uncomfortable. I think approaching this conversation whenever everybody is kind of in a more comfortable setting really helps out. And I think, even having uncomfortable conversations with kids about, this is why grandma's sick. I think that's actually really helpful rather than shielding people from uncomfortable conversations and uncomfortable situations. I think we should do a better job as a society in kind of having these conversations with folks.
Yeah, opening up the dialect and having that conversation. And that's a great way of thinking about it too for kids. You don't think about it because you do want to shield them from having to see these sometimes terrible aspects of the lives that we are living, right? Or that we're seeing every single day. So that's a really good point that you just made. Um, Speaking of teaching, that's something that I know that you like to do. I actually was with you in the ER the other day, and we had a peri arrest come in. You were so calm and collected, which you should be, right? We're in this position for a reason. Um, but we were watching another physician work, and I was really questioning why things were being done the way that they were being done, because it's not the way that I would have done it. And I really appreciated your kind of look on it, kind of setting aside, really talking with you and talking about how, like, just because this isn't the way that I would have done it doesn't mean it's not safe, right? Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. He's just doing it in a different way. And I really, really appreciated that, especially because I have taught people, right? I have been in that like FTO, field training officer position, or I've been in a position where I'm helping teach people in an ambulance or on the airplane or even in the ER. How do you keep that calm, right? And when do you decide to step in on somebody who's maybe either learning or even a colleague that's just doing something completely different than the way you would do it?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Keeping calm, I think it is all about breath training. I think it's all about kind of like just taking a step back and just realizing that like, this kind of goes back to our previous conversation about imposter syndrome too. Where sometimes you have to take a step back and just say, all right, I know I have the skills, I know I have the abilities to help out in the situation, whatever that situation is, even if even if something feels outside of your realm or you feel way in over your head. I feel that if you just kind of take that moment and examine and say, okay, I know that I have to do the basics. The basics are my ABCs, and I have to cover my ABCs and start running through all of the basics in your mind. I think kind of some of the pieces fall into place and that kind of helps you maintain your sense of calm and sanity in some of those situations. And that's kind of what I do in any situation where, I may feel that, an arrest is way over my head or an impending ECMO cannulation is way over my head. But I kind of just run through the basics and I say, okay, well, we're going to start with airway. We're going to start with vascular access. We're going to intubate the patient. We're going to try to establish some sort of access on this patient. And then we're going to go from there and we're going to kind of take each new problem as it comes to us. And we're going to take breaths in between each of these and we're going to pause in between each of these steps so that way we can kind of maintain our sense of calm. And hope and hopefully that gives a sense of calm to the other team members And I think kind of being that pillar of strength for other people, and kind of being that beacon for other people just makes the situation so much better.
Sure. Yeah, no, and that totally makes sense. So have you ever had a point or been to a point where you had to step in to take over for somebody else because it was becoming unsafe? Or do you generally feel like most of it's handled pretty well?
You know, I work with a ton of great people. And so, I haven't really had many situations where I've had to step in because something was unsafe, or where I had to, for lack of a better term, like swat somebody's hand away because it was that unsafe. Um, my particular style is, if something is bordering on unsafe, I will step in and I'll make gentle suggestions, which is kind of what I've had to do in the past, where, if I've seen something that is really counterintuitive to how a patient should be managed, I'll make a gentle suggestion, and that's usually tolerated well. And I feel like that kind of collaborative atmosphere really it accomplishes two things. It helps your colleague not feel, accosted and not feel confronted, and at the same time kind of snaps them into an environment of, oh yeah, maybe I should think about another way to do this, or another plan of care for this patient. Um, and it kind of does it in a safer manner. And it also, if your patient is awake and if your patient is aware of kind of what's going on, it also kind of helps inspire some confidence as well in the team, rather than, a lot of the infighting can really ruin patient interactions and really kind of ruin relationships in the hospital setting. Now, to kind of answer the other question, I don't know, how it would handle something that was truly unsafe, or if somebody was being really unruly. I'm lucky that I haven't really had many, or if any of those interactions.
Well, I'll knock on wood for you, Nick. I hope that you don't have any of those interactions. But I do like that you're saying s gentle suggestions, right? Because the last thing I want to do is take away somebody's confidence while they're in the middle of running a shit show, right? Like, I don't want to take
No,
that away from them. And I think it's easy, and we all know how easy it is to kind of like pinhole when you put on your blinders while you're in these like super crazy moments. And I mean, you could be the best at what you do, and something might just catch you off guard, and you end up going down the wrong path, which we practice medicine, right? We don't know it super great, but we practice to the best of our ability. And I think it's easy sometimes to kind of get stuck in that rut. So I really like that you said slight suggestions to kind of help direct them in a right direction, or in a more safer direction, or maybe even a quicker direction than they're going at that time.
totally. We're all just learning, right?
Yes.
I mean, every day, even though your training has maybe stopped or you've completed your training, every day is a learning day. And so hopefully you get better over time, and you get smarter over time, or you get faster over time. I think the second you stop learning, or the second you say, I already know everything, that is the day where you introduce the possibility for mistakes and for bad outcomes. Where it's just if you've already decided that you know everything, then there's no helping anymore. And you become more of a dangerous person than a help.
Sure. Yeah, totally understandable. And that's not to say that mistakes don't happen, right? Because mistakes happen whether
Totally.
there was ill intent or not. It really depends on how you respond to that mistake, right? Like if you own up to it, you let your physician know, or you let whoever know that's next in line that needs to find out. That's really where it comes down to. And being able to admit those mistakes, to be able to move past them, is I think what's going to make and create a better culture in the future. I think we're seeing a lot of accidents happen that aren't super great. I don't know if you saw the paramedic that pushed I believe it was ketamine, and they ended up killing somebody when they were trying to restrain, and it was an accident. They killed somebody and it was an accident, and it's hard to justify that in our position, but also it's really hard. Like, I can understand being in that position also, right? Because you're in the heat of the moment. This person is like physically attacking you. You're coworkers, PD, like whoever, and you just need to get control of this situation to calm down and find out what is causing the issue here and pulling that wrong med. I
Yeah,
can see it happening.
100%. And I mean, I think those of us in healthcare have all in whatever facet have all been in that position, right? Where, we've all had those days where, the patients are throwing things at us or yelling or screaming, and it is very easy to lose your focus to make a simple error and a very bad error. That's kind of what I was saying before too, is that it is really good to not judge other people.
Hmm.
And it's really good to not to make assumptions, right? Because we have all been in those situations, and it's hard for me sometimes whenever I hear people say things like, "Oh, that couldn't ever happen to me." And it can.
It
Um,
very much can. Yes.
it it can happen to you, and it happens to the best nurse, it happens to the best doctor, and it happens to the worst ones too.
Yes,
And so yeah, it's hard whenever you hear about these incidents though, and they're incredibly sad.
it
And we
is
try to
sad.
avoid them. Yeah, we try to avoid them at all costs.
Yes. And we do that by how, Nick?
Oh, that is I think that's the million-dollar question, right? Like how do we make things safer in an incredibly complex world? Um, I don't have a great answer for this at all.
What do you think the
Um,
best kind of
yeah.
training is?
I think the best kind of training is preventative training, personally.
Preventative
I
training,
mean,
right?
yeah.
And we can't
Yeah, I
always
think
practice on people. So
yeah.
how do we bridge that gap if we can't always practice on people?
Well, one of my passion projects also, I work in a medical simulation center. And so right now, I'm the medical director for simulation services at the university that I work at. I think it's a really good opportunity for new trainees and even seasoned nurses, physicians, paramedics, pharmacists to kind of learn in a non-confrontational environment. They can come down to our simulation center, practice on either task trainers if they have a particular procedure in mind, or they can run full-fledged high fidelity simulations on one of the mannequins and really kind of experiment with different scenarios and kind of see first how they would respond to sometimes stressful situations, how they would optimize their care, or how they would kind of change their care. And then they can also review their own video images and kind of see how they responded in that code, and then change for the next time. And so I think that kind of preventative really helps out in the real world and makes things safer for our human patients whenever we practice on some of our simulation patients.
Sure. I think, and this may be an unpopular opinion, but I think that our senior practitioners in whatever level that you are, right? I think that they should be getting just as much training as some of our new people, right? Because if you look, I'm going to use PD as an example, right? So we recently had a police officer who had performed a traffic stop. One of the males got out of the vehicle and was running. And she said, I'm going to tase you. I'm going to tase you. She pulled her weapon out and ended up shooting this guy on accident. And I don't know like if she had convinced herself that it was the taser, right? We can't speculate to those things. I think though she either switched her taser and her actual gun. So she went to pull her taser out because that's the side she normally puts her taser on, or she just completely blanked in that moment. And that is such a huge thing that we are talking about in training right now is you want to like practice how you play, right? And practice
Yeah.
often because pulling out and shooting that person is just as dangerous as pulling out that wrong medication. Saying that that can never happen to you is so incredibly false, right? Like, unless you are to the T doing the exact same thing, every single time there are going to be mistakes made. And I can't speak for on the floors, I can't speak for anywhere else, just in the ER and in the ambulance. When shit is hitting the fan and it is getting hectic, you don't have time to go through the 7, 10, 15 R's that we have now for medication, right? Wait, like you need this
Exactly.
med, you need this med now. That doesn't mean don't take a break, don't take a breath for 1 second, make sure what you're doing is right. But we don't have that 7, 10, 15 step process that we typically do in training. So being able to train in a sim lab and getting that practice in is super helpful. When our brains can't think anymore, we need to go back to what we know, and what we know is training.
1,000%. And I don't think what you said is an unpopular opinion at all. I do think lots of our seasoned professionals need to maintain their training, right? And so we do have a lot of people that come down to the simulation center that ask for kind of refreshers, where, you know, some people will say, "Oh, I haven't done a central line in, 10 years. Can you just walk me through this?" Or "I haven't done an intubation in a couple years and I feel really anxious about it. I want to just practice on my own." And I think that's fantastic. I even myself, this morning I was experimenting with one of the echocardiogram simulators in one of the back rooms where I was like, "Oh, this is, I haven't reviewed this particular method in a long time." And so I thought, let me just take a couple minutes and just kind of refresh my memory. And I think that's what we should do. I think you are exactly right, where yes, we do have time for breaths, but sometimes whenever it is crunch time and you really have got to just, figure out what medication you want or figure out the next course of action, I we hope that it's at the top of your brain or on the tip of your tongue. And that's kind of what we do down here too, is through repetition, you develop that muscle memory or those algorithms in your brain, and then you can whip them out in scary situations.
Right. And I am not a huge advocate for memorization, right? And that's exactly why, because through repetition, you get that kind of baseline level that you need to be at. Where, like, anytime I'm responding to a PEDS or any type, really anything, even with like a sepsis response or something, I'm double checking my medications. I don't want to have that memorized because it changes all the time, right? Medicine
Totally.
changes all the time. So where we used to have Levophed, and the saying was, if you're using Levophed, leave them dead, right? Levophed is now one of the primary choices for most types of shock, right? So it's really neat, a really cool dynamic to see. Again, I'm not a huge advocate of memorizing. Definitely repetition, though. Practice, practice, practice. Take that second to stop, review that medication, make sure that you know what you're giving, and make sure that the concentration is correct for medications, because that is a huge thing.
Yeah, I know this makes me sound like dated and old, but whenever I was in training, we didn't before all that we had in the past for anti-coag is warfarin, and then
Mhm.
whenever I had so because I did an MD PhD, I started medical school with warfarin, and then in the middle of my PhD they invented DOAC, so they invented apixaban. And then whenever I came out of my PhD back into medical school, everybody was talking about these new drugs, and I was like, "What the hell are you talking about? We have warfarin, right?"
Yeah,
I mean, like that's just how fast things happen in today's day and age. I mean, it's crazy.
it is crazy the amount of I I was having this conversation the other day too. I think it is so cool, so cool that we can give a medication that goes to a receptor site and changes the shape of it. And that is its primary focus as a medication. How freaking cool is that? And that, like, the things that are coming out so much faster than they did 5, 10 years ago, you know? So it is
Yep,
changing. I think that's medicine is so interesting. I love this stuff. I love nerding out on it.
totally.
So in your time in medicine, has there ever been a point where you were like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore? Have you ever second guessed your decision, or maybe your location? Maybe you're like, I don't know if I want to do critical care or emergency medicine anymore.
I think I think it's completely natural to do that. I think we all have that on, I wouldn't say a daily basis, but after hard cases or after hard days. Yeah, I think it's totally reasonable to have that. I know, I did a lot of my training during COVID, and there were many, many times where I second guessed myself of, is this really what I want to do? Is, just after seeing thousands of people die or hundreds of intubations or tons of difficult family conversations. Um, I would constantly second guess myself and kind of say, maybe I did pick the wrong path. And, maybe I should go back and be a veterinarian. Who knows? Um, but I think at the end of the day, looking back on it, I think that this is probably always the path that I was meant to be on. And I think like I'm very much into like the universe and karmic pathways, and so like I think that this was probably always the pathway that I was meant to be on, and I think looking at it that way, it kind of brings you a little bit of peace and solace. Um, I also, to answer your second question, I think I'm in like a really good position, kind of being dual boarded in emergency medicine and critical care. It kind of gives me, the best of both worlds. And really, whenever one becomes too much, or whenever I get bored with one, I kind of hop into the other one for a little bit of time. And then whenever I get another sense that I'm kind of bored of that one, then I hop back into the first one. And so it's kind of nice to dance around on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, no, it is good to get a kind of break from one area to the other. And the benefit for that too is you're not being surrounded by all the same people. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, but sometimes the people that we work with can just irk us, especially when we're there, right? We see some of these people more than we see our spouses or our family sometimes, depending on
Yeah.
how bad we want to punish ourselves and be at work every day, right? Like,
Totally. Yeah, I think I see the people at work more than I see my husband,
yeah,
which is, yeah, I mean, he's amazing and he has sacrificed a ton to like support my career and to support both of our careers. But yeah, that's hard, and I agree with you. I think there's drama on both sides, right? And so whenever the drama becomes too much on one side, that's whenever you can hop back to the other
yes,
side. And it's just a variety is the spice of life, and so you get a little taste of some different drama, and then you can hop back to the first one again.
for sure. That's awesome. Do you have any like ghosts? I call them ghosts, right? Or particularly bad calls or even patients that haunt you, and do you feel comfortable sharing one of those stories?
Yeah, I can think of a couple ghosts, and I think if you've been practicing for anything more than like a year or two, you're gonna have some ghosts. So one particularly tough case, I got in sign out that this patient was completely stable, but just had a little bit of a high heart rate. She originally had come in with like a pretty bad skin reaction. And so we were, of course, really worried about her. She had taken a medication that had given her a pretty particularly bad skin reaction. Um, and the unfortunate part is despite us paying a ton of attention to her whenever she started to get sicker, and trying to support her every way that we could, she ended up coding. And then in the middle of the code, because she was a perfect ECMO candidate, we had tried to put her on complete life support on ECMO. And unfortunately, her vasculature just wasn't really permissive of that. And so, there was really nothing that we could do to get her heart back, and there was nothing that we could do to support her on ECMO. And so, unfortunately, she died. Um, and this case happened super early in my career, and so it kind of marked a stamp on like the beginning of me being an attending. And so it happened maybe 2 months into me being, an independent physician. And so I think that's one case that I think about quite frequently. Um, I'm sure there's a ton more cases that I can kind of think of. Um, and I think the issue is that you collect all of these little ghosts, and hopefully you learn something from them. And hopefully that they're not just ghosts that show up whenever you're trying to go to sleep. My hope is that we all learn something from all of our ghosts, and we grow.
And what do you feel like you learned from her?
I think I learned from her to definitely, if somebody tells you that somebody is completely stable, but something doesn't feel right, it should perk something up in the back of the hairs on the back of your neck or something in the back of your mind. And I feel that I've always kind of had that sense, but it really reinforced that for me, where if something doesn't feel right, it's not. If the puzzle pieces don't fit together, then there's something missing. And I think that case really just hammered it home for me. It was that case in particular just kind of was difficult just because, the pieces didn't fit together. We were paying attention to her and we were trying to help her the best that we could. And it just didn't, unfortunately, it was just nothing that we could do to help her.
And do you feel like there was anything that you could have changed in that circumstance?
Wow. Yeah, I think in that case, gosh, I think probably even earlier intervention, kind of helping her at immediately whenever I received her in sign out, and just kind of if I knew that she was sick and her breathing needed to be supported more, just early intubation in her. And but it's kind of hard to say. I don't know if anything would have really helped her.
I ask this because I like to see people's responses to these questions. And honestly, Nick, like if you knew something was wrong, right, which you did, you're saying that you felt that something was wrong, it was already too late at that point, right? We could have taken over her breathing, right? We could have put a tube down. You're saying that her vasculature wasn't very supportive to begin with, right? So it sounds like there, even if you had put a breathing tube down, right, and you're changing her now to uh, positive pressure ventilation, that could have changed for the worse
Yeah.
faster, right? When we're taking people's intrinsic breathing away and we're now forcing air down their lungs, we can actually make things worse faster. I don't think that in the however long from the time you got to shift to the time that she coded, you would have changed anything, honestly. I'm glad to hear that you took that as a learning lesson, right? Like if you're feeling something in your gut is wrong, you're learning to follow that. But I really, like, I don't want you to focus on if you could have changed it because you couldn't.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think that's also why we review these cases too. Like in our mind and with each other, we kind of talk or it, one of the that I like to do with my residents is I do tea time. And so, I usually whenever I'm working in the ICU at 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning, we'll sit down and we'll have a cup of tea and kind of just review cases and things like that are particularly troubling. Sometimes it's just a dish about feelings. Sometimes it's tea time with tea time, and we talk about like the piping hot drama that's going on in residency programs or whatever. Um, but I think that that's really important to review with your colleagues. And like, I appreciate you saying that there's probably nothing that I could have done. You're probably right. I hope I hope I learned something from this, and I hope that there's nothing else that I could have done. Um, but it's one of those things that still needs to be reviewed. And as you can tell, even though I've reviewed it in my brain, I still probably have more questions than answers. And you always wonder the what ifs about every situation. What if this would have happened? What if that would have happened? And it's hard because you can't go back in time.
No, you can't go back in time, but you know, I know you know, right? That nothing could have changed that would have changed the outcome there. maybe earlier intervention, but that would have had to have been started way before you came on shift to kind of help
Yeah,
slow that progression. Um, but I really do appreciate that you're taking the time, especially with your students and hopefully even colleagues, to take that tea time, as you said. That is like one of the coolest things. I wish in the ER we could, not in the ER necessarily, but in trauma, that we could sometimes just take that moment to like hang out and decompress for just 10 minutes if we have that ability. It just
I
doesn't
know.
happen as often as I would like it to.
I wish it could happen downstairs consistently. I think that's probably why I haven't done it a ton down in our emergency department. Because it's just hard to find consistency. You know,
Yeah.
the nature of emergency medicine is something is always happening, and there's always, there's always a trauma, there's always an emergency, there's always a medical code, there's always something going on that tends to pull your attention away, and so it's hard to find those little moments of peace. Upstairs in the ICU, it's a little bit more it's more reliable that you kind of find those moments of solace. Even if it's sneaking away for like 5 minutes just to take a breather outside, it's something that's a little bit more reliable and consistent.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And what's one of your like, if I was somebody from off the streets and I came up to you and I said, "What has been your most favorite moment? What is your favorite moment in your career?"
No,
what would you share?
I mean, I have so many favorite moments and so many favorite people. I think
That's good. That's a good way to
yeah.
be.
Yeah. I think my favorite moments are, after hard shifts or after particularly hard cases. So I typically work nights. So for kind of like disclosure here too. And so not everybody will have this experience. But I think going up to the helipad on the roof of our building and kind of just watching the sun come up, whenever I like look back on my career and I kind of remember those moments, those are my favorite times, is just kind of either walking up to the helipad, maybe walking out to the parking lot and just seeing the sun come up over those mountains. It's fantastic. It makes me like feel refreshed and renewed and feel like, all right, well, maybe it was a great day. Maybe it wasn't a great day. But either way, I can keep going for another day.
That's fantastic. And I hope that next time you come and get me.
Heck yeah.
Let's do this, Nico. Let's do this.
Let's do it.
How about one of your like, tell me one of the moments that you had where you're like, this is why I do this job. The like a self-affirming story. Have you had any of those? I'm sure you have. You're a doctor.
I've had a ton, but I've got to think of like a decent one. Ah, I had a particularly it was a hard case, and it was whenever I was a resident, where we had a patient who just had a really bad GI bleed. She had been estranged from her family for quite some time, and she kind of had just this slow dwindling course from the ED and the ICU. And I saw her in the ED and then took care of her in the ICU because I was kind of between the two rotations. And she was estranged from her family, so I located her family and convinced her to start talking to her daughter again. And unfortunately, throughout the course of her ICU stay, she ended up getting intubated and she had a really terrible bleed. And there was no intervention that ended up being successful for her. And so she unfortunately also died. But she was able to reconnect with her daughter beforehand. And I was able to give them those moments together. And then later, I ended up working with her daughter at a different institution or a different facility. And she came up to me and she's like, I still remember you, and I still remember the time that you gave me with my mom. And it's one of those things that's like, it kind of still hits me a little bit
Hmm.
where it is very much like, wow, like something that, of course I realize the significance of it, and that part hasn't gone unnoticed. But it's one of those things to where it's like, wow, it hits at your heart and it's like, I did that. I like, maybe we couldn't you won't save every single patient, but sometimes it's not in the healing part, the healing of a patient part that you have success. Sometimes it's healing relationships. Sometimes it's giving people those moments. And I think that's why I do this. I see those moments.
That's amazing. Did you like have to, did you Google her or did you check social media or how did you find the daughter?
No, no, I think, I'm trying to remember now. Oh man, it's been a while. I think we ended up finding her on Facebook, or on some sort of social media. Her mom gave us the name of her daughter, and we ended up finding her on Facebook. And I'm pretty sure I just messaged her out of the
Yeah.
blue and was like, "Hey, your mom's in the hospital right now, and maybe you should come up and see her." And then she gave me the phone number, and at first was kind of reticent to talk. And then we convinced her to first talk to the mom and then come up to the hospital. And then I think upon that, I think that's really whenever things just kind of unfolded. And I think like they had those moments together.
That's beautiful. Sometimes it's easy to forget that our job can be beautiful sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
We see so much negativity that we forget to look for the positivity. And it sounds like you're doing a really good job in finding that positivity in tea time, in your sunsets on the helipad, and through family, which is great.
I think as I've gotten older, also, I think I was always, whenever I was training, I was so focused on the medicine and focused on you have to get everything right. You have to get every pathway. You have to get every algorithm or every procedure. And I think as I've gotten older, I think I have noticed that medicine is so much more than that. And, of course, we have to practice good medicine, but I think also I really enjoy like the little things like seeing my patient walk on a ventilator, and like walking them around the ICU whenever they're intubated, or, talking to families and reconnecting families that haven't talked in decades. Or, being able to hear these wonderful stories about my patients and how cool they were before they were, here in the ICU, and all of the amazing things that they did, and really connecting with them on that kind of level. That's honestly really what I've like really grown to love, and what I find super interesting about my job and super rewarding about my job.
Well, I think you ended up on the right side of not the spectrum, but you ended up on the right side of medicine, right? You ended up on the human side. And I think there's a reason for that. You're doing good work, Nico. Um, are you proud of where you are today?
I'm very proud. I'm happy. It's hard for me. I'm just one of those people that I'm not a good person to talk about myself. I just don't like that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I can look at myself in the mirror and say to myself is that I'm very proud of where I ended up. I think my life and my career could have gone a lot of different directions. But the direction that it went, I'm very, very proud of, and I'm very proud of the people that I help here in New Mexico, and I love our community. I love all of the people that I work with, and I'm proud to be such a part of such a group of wonderful people and people that care about others. And that's why I hope that's the reason why we all do this.
I think that the majority of us do. I don't think it's everybody's drive, but I do think it is the majority of people. I'm so proud of you, dude. Like I told you, we've known each other for at least 10 years now. I'm super proud of where you are. It, like in relation to where you were when I first saw you, I thought you were awesome then. You're even more awesome now. I love you so much. And
Well,
I had
likewise.
such a fantastic conversation with you today. I hope you had a good time on the 911 Nonsense podcast.
Likewise. I love you dearly, friend, and I look forward to the next decade with you.
Yes, for sure. Oh, for sure. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye, Nico.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show and want to show your support, be sure to check out the Noon merch store on Bonfire. Find the link in the description below. Also, if you have any guest suggestions or if you're interested in being a guest on Noon yourself, visit the website at www.samspursuit.com to get in touch.